There was a moment when everything could still be stopped. I remember choosing to move forward anyway. I rarely go back to Black Velvet in my head. That song is too tightly bound to a time when I didn't yet understand who I was or what I was willing to agree to. It came out in 1989. Within a year, it had gone global. In 1990, it reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. In 1991, I received a Grammy. All of it happened faster than I could grasp what was actually happening to me. I didn't feel victory. I felt events moving ahead of my ability to choose. Like I was reacting more and more and deciding less and less. I grew up in Toronto in a family where feelings weren't something you talked about. My father was a journalist. My mother was a librarian. They were calm, rational people. There was no yelling in our house, no dramatic confrontations. But there were also no questions when you were struggling. It was assumed you could handle it on your own. I learned early that showing weakness meant making life harder for other people. That upbringing made me independent, but it left my inner compass badly calibrated. I didn't always know where my own desires ended and where the habit of not bothering anyone began. By the time I was working on Black Velvet, I was living alone. I spent almost all my time working. I had relationships, but they didn't last long. I entered intimacy easily, and I left it just as easily the moment I felt expectation or dependence. I didn't know how to be close to someone without keeping constant control of the situation. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid that if I allowed myself to be honest, I would either be pitied or used. So I chose silence, I chose distance, and I called it independence. Christopher Ward was my partner and co-writer during that period. He was a journalist and a poet, observant, direct. He asked questions I didn't ask myself. Sometimes it felt like he could see straight through me. That irritated me. I felt exposed around him. We talked a lot about lyrics, about rhythm, about meaning. But we almost never talked about what was happening between us. I preferred to keep the conversation in the safe territory of words. One scene I remember very clearly happened after the first positive reactions to the demo. We were sitting at my place, in the kitchen. He said he felt me pulling away. He asked if I was afraid of what was happening to me. I felt my shoulders tense, my teeth clenched. I answered quickly, flatly. I said everything was under control, that it wasn't the time for conversations. It was a deliberate lie. I said it because, in that moment, preserving the feeling of strength mattered more to me than being understood. He went quiet. That silence lasted longer than any conversation. Then we went to different rooms. The night passed in silence. In the morning, we acted as if nothing had happened. But from that point on, there were unresolved questions between us, and I knew I was the one who had left them unanswered. The idea of Black Velvet was originally tied to Elvis Presley, not as a person, as a cultural image. Christopher talked about his trip through the American South, about Memphis, about Graceland, about how the past feels there, dense, insistent, unwilling to let go. For us, the song was very specific, about a myth that outlived the man, about youth turned into legend, about music that keeps sounding, even when the body is gone. While we were writing it, I was thinking about the feeling of missing not a real person, but an image, a state, a time you can't return to. It was a song about longing and attraction, about slow, heavy desire, about a state you can't go back to. Working in the studio with David Tyson was focused and calm. He knew how to hear when I needed to stop. I sang slowly, not as a strategy, I sang slowly because I couldn't go faster. My body resisted. Sometimes after a take, my legs felt weak. I sat down right on the floor. I understood that this delivery would be perceived as sensual. And here it matters, to be honest. I liked that. I liked feeling that I could control attention without raising my voice, without explaining myself. There was a sense of power in it, and I didn't turn away from that feeling. During that same period, a manager from the American branch of the label was constantly around. His name was Mark. He wore the same dark jackets. He spoke quietly, almost without intonation. He never raised his voice. He rarely held eye contact for more than a couple of seconds. There was no warmth in him, and no hostility, only calculation. Mark treated me like a task that needed to be properly delivered to a result. As the song started climbing the charts, he called more often, but the conversations grew shorter. I noticed that around him, I didn't need to be myself. It was enough to be a number, a graph, a result, and at certain moments, that was a relief. The ugliest thing I did during that time is tied directly to that feeling of control. When it became known that the label was considering giving the song to another artist, I didn't start an open conflict. I simply did everything to make sure it didn't happen. I insisted on my vocal, on the final version. I sped up decisions. I left no room for alternatives. I didn't discuss it with Christopher, even though he was a co-writer. I acted out of fear of losing control, and out of a desire to keep the success for myself. When the decision was made, I didn't feel relief. I felt a strange heaviness. My stomach hurt. I couldn't eat for several hours. I knew I had won, and that feeling was the most unpleasant part. When label representatives said the image needed to be clearer, they meant very specific things. Smile more in interviews, soften my wording, emphasize femininity. Don't look closed off or irritated. I agreed, and every time after those conversations, I felt a physical recoil, tightness in my chest, nausea, the urge to be alone. I didn't argue because I was afraid of losing support at the exact moment when success was just beginning. One journalist from that time stands out in my memory. His name was Tom. He wrote for a major music publication. He came to interview me right after the song entered the top. He was polite, almost friendly, but he asked questions as if he already knew the answers. He wasn't interested in me. He was interested in a story he could neatly fit me into. At one point, he asked if I felt like the new muse of the American dream. I smiled. I joked it off. Inside, everything tightened. I realized he had already written the piece, and I was simply the right figure for it. After the interview, I felt tired and angry, mostly at myself, because I had allowed myself to be used as a convenient image, and I hadn't resisted it. The person on the team I felt closest to was a woman named Sarah. She handled studio logistics and scheduling. She didn't shape the image, she didn't make decisions, but she was always there. She spoke simply, sometimes sharply. She didn't pretend to understand more than she did. When I was exhausted, she was the one who suggested taking a break, stepping outside, sitting in silence. I felt grateful to her, but I kept my distance. Now I can see that she was one of the few people I could have been a little more open with. But I didn't take that chance. Control mattered more. Again. After the song came out, the way people related to me changed. Musicians I used to interact with as equals kept their distance. Managers treated me like an asset. Journalists treated me like a story that needed to be told correctly. There were people on the team I felt genuine gratitude toward, for their support, for their steadiness. And there were people I openly used, letting them stay close as long as it was convenient. I understood that, and I didn't try to change anything. My relationship with Christopher was gradually falling apart. Success intensified everything we hadn't resolved. I felt him pulling away, and at the same time, I used work as an excuse not to return to the conversation. I knew I was losing him, and I still kept moving forward. There was no independence in that. There was stubbornness and fear of looking weak. The ending of this story still leaves me with doubt and contradiction. Black Velvet continues to live on, and the questions it opened for me are still hanging in the air. Sometimes it feels like I call the habit of doubting everything experience, because it's easier that way. Sometimes it feels like I'm still avoiding an honest answer with myself. And more often, I'm troubled by the thought that maybe I simply liked that state, moving forward without looking back, feeling full control over the situation, not allowing anyone to get close. Even now, I'm not sure I want to or can fully give that up.